we have Arundhati Roy is the god of small things. And then we have Amitav Ghosh, the shadow lines. So welcome to the class of BRAOU, Ambedkar University online session. So this is our final module today. Welcome. So before I begin, let me just share the PPT with you all. Yes. So today we are going to talk about the background, actually, the historical background of the English literature, the so-called English literature of Indian continent. Okay. So the term Indian English literature, formerly known as Indo-Anglican or Indo-English literature, connotates literature written in English by Indian authors. It remarkably differs from Anglo-Indian literature, which was created by Englishmen in India, who were fascinated by her romantic and exotic charm. They made India the main theme of their writings. It is, for the most part, merely English literature marked by Indian local color. So Indian writing in English began much before the establishment of the British colonial rule in India and has survived the collapse of the empire. Now, talking about, right, so Indian English literature. Now, this being quite a relatively recent history, being nearly 2 centuries old, and the first book written by an Indian in English was the Travels of Deen Muhammad, a travel narrative by Said Deen Muhammad, published in England in 1794. In its early stages, had influence from the Western novel. So basically, they are taking the influence, the Western novel structure. This has been written. So early Indian writers used English unadulterated by Indian words to convey an experience which was essentially Indian. So to name the writer here, I would like to mention Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. So 1838 to 1894, wrote Raj Mohan's Wife and published it in 1864, making it the first Indian novel written in English. Now, Lal Bahri's Days, Govinda Samanta, or the History of a Bengali Riot, was published in 1874. Now, again, the same author's Folk Tales of Bengal, Life's Secret, was published in 1912. Then The Young Spanish Maiden by Toru Dutt was the first novel written by an Indian woman. So both Toru Dutt and Krupabai Satyanandan, two promising Indian English writers of the 19th century, who are, of course, have died untimely in their early 20s and 30s, respectively. So then there is another, which is an autobiographical novel, Saguna, a story of native Christian life, was published, which was written by Satyanandan, published serially in the Madras Christian College magazine from 1887 to 1888. So the non-fictional body of prose works consisting of letters, diaries, political manifesto, articles, speeches, philosophical works, etc. So in Indian English literature of the 19th and the early 20th century is rich and varied. So the speeches of Swami Vivekananda, Rabindranath Tagore, Chittaranjan Das, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Mahatma Gandhi, and Subhash Chandra Bose, to name only a few, shaped the destiny of modern India and also the destiny of English language in India. So Gandhi's Indian Home Rule, or Hind Swaraj, was written in an indigenous variety of the English language and challenged successfully the the difference of standard English, and even before R.K. Narayan, M.R. Anand, and Raja Rao. So again, Raja Rao, he's an Indian philosopher and writer, authored Kantapura and the Serpent and the Rope. And then we have Kesari Mohan Ganguly. He translated the Mahabharata into English. So basically, we're talking about the historical background of Indian English literature. Then again, we can talk about Rabindranath Tagore, who wrote in Bengali and English and was responsible for the translations of his own work into English. Then we have Dhan Gopal Mukherjee, was the first Indian author to win a literary award in the United States. Then, so these were, again, we also have, I think we are all familiar with Swami and Friends, where, R.K. Narayan's. So it's about a small town life and its experiences through the eyes of the enduring child protagonist, Swaminathan. So that is also, again, another literature piece of work. Then Mulk Raj Anand, again, was similarly gaining recognition for his writing set in rural India, but his stories were harsher and engaged sometimes brutally with divisions of caste, class, and religion. Right. So moving on to the next slide. So language in contemporary Indian literature. So basically, we are talking about the English language of the Indian origin, right? The mixture of the Indianized English language. So now we're talking about the language in contemporary Indian literature. So the distinct Indian flavor was back in the English language, and thus the works of the modern Indian writers reflected the Indianized English. Be it Salman Rushdie, Shashi Tharoor, or Amitav Ghosh, the deconstruction of the British of English was quite evident. The regional language were freely used in the prose forms, thus once again breaking, restructuring, and adding a new twist and dimension to the traditional narrative patterns. Now, Hindi, Gujarati, Bengali, Telugu, Tamil, Kannada, Marathi writers adhere to the modern and postmodern idiom of writing. For instance, Mulk Raj Anand's work is replete with Hindi and Punjabi words like ha, na, salam, hujur, shabash, shabash. In Coolie, he says shabash. Most path-breaking is Arundhati Roy's use of untranslated Malayalam words in day-to-day conversations in her The God of Small Things, like Chako Sir Vannu. She's very beautiful. Sundari Kuti. Uvar Urkunale Kushambi. So these are kind of, they have brought in their language, some untranslated Malayalam words into it. Now, as far as poetry was concerned, it did not necessarily rhyme. Rather, rhyme was done away with consciously to bring forth the discordance in the life of modern man. Both Indian English and regional poems deliberately distance themselves from rhythm. Now, themes in contemporary Indian literature. When you look at the post-independence, India was faced with a number of crises, including social, political, and economic. So the society was in a continuous state of flux. This time, the writers were no more eulogizing their nation. Rather, they were bringing to the forefront the reality through their works. Both verse and prose were time and again emphasizing on the dominant crisis in order to establish a new narrative to break away from the colonial mindset. Contemporary Indian writers adapted new narrative patterns to put through their notions. Okay, so this was all about the language now in contemporary Indian literature. Now moving on to the themes in contemporary Indian literature. So it was like, most of the time it was experimentation in contemporary Indian English literature. So like making a move from the 18th or 19th century that had indeed sowed the budding phase of then referred contemporary Indian literature. Writers belonging to contemporary India are additionally very conscious about their own culture and traditions. Hence, can be witnessed a massive body of vernacular language and literature flourishing in it. While some of the authors pen in English, most of them continue to write in their colloquial languages. The philosophy and thought behind their works exhibit influences of Western thought we're going to talk about feminism. Feminism in contemporary Indian fiction. Right. So feminism in Indian fiction has been a series of counters and ordeals on the part of women to strike roots, to belong and assert her identity in a transitional society. So basically, women are, they are born free, but she's in chains. She has become the subordinate sex, but not always and everywhere. So all women do not conform. So they rebel, they reconcile. Hence, so it has been seen them in voices in the city. They are Kali as well, or Durga, symbols of destruction. And, or maybe Draupadi, who appeared at a later period, could not be said to passive, submissive, docile, and servile, for while Sita in the Ramayana resisted the demonic aggressiveness of Ravana. So the protest was voiced in many forms in Indian English fiction. Not only women writers like Anita Desai, Nayantara Sehgal, Shashi Deshpande, Kamala Markandeya, but male writers like Tagore, Mulk Raj Anand, R.K. Narayan, Manohar Malgaonkar, etc. They well on tortured womanhood. So Tagore brought woman out of the kitchen into the parlor. His Damini is a symbol of feminine strength, a woman who throws a challenge to the orthodox, high-bound Bengali society through her remarriage. Yet Tagore's woman remains half human and half dream. Mulk Raj Anand places a woman in a traditional socio-cultural melee of a stifling conventional Hindu society where she is doomed to a life of degradation and dehumanization. So a life of mental subjugation and conditional responses. Then we have so men remain hollow and women unredeemed, dumb creatures caught in the Darwinian world of the survival of the fittest, unable to pull their weight beyond the biological. So Anand's Lajwanti is a prototype, pathetic image of Indian womanhood shrunk half size, while his Gauri explodes the Sita myth into 1,000 fragments and retrieves the female species through her symbolic emancipation on the road to Hoshiarpur, and the spurious righteousness of masculine hegemony disintegrates in the face of Gauri's newfound freedom. Then we have R.K. Narayan's The Dark Room, which projects the lopsided family life of Ramani, where there is little understanding between husband and wife. Savitri makes an unsuccessful attempt to run away and live a life of her own, but ultimately comes back to the life she had left behind. So her spirited protest ends in a gratuitous homecoming. Narayan marks man-woman relationship on the marital plane in The Dark Room, and the English teacher and on the extramarital plane in The Guide. Okay, so this is a bit about the feminism in contemporary Indian fiction. Then we have a lot of themes in contemporary Indian fiction. So to name them, maybe we can call about the lesbian and gay theme, crime fiction and detective novel in India, campus novel in India, graphic novel in India. And also there was literature showing concern for the subalterns. Then we have eco-criticism and anthropological concerns. Then we have also the literature written in English about the historical sense. Then we also come across Indian diaspora novelists too. So when we talk about this lesbian themes, so well, see, queerness is not a new thing in India.
no matter the conservatives who tell you how it's a modern invention caused by Western influence that goes against our traditions and cultural values. In fact, there is a rich history of literature about homosexuality, transgenderism, and gender fluidity. From ancient epics to scriptures to medieval prose and poetry to art and architecture, queerness is present. So, okay, section 377. Section 377, which made sexual acts against nature illegal, was added by the British during colonial rule. Still, queer literature was written and read, even if the writers were prosecuted for obscenity. So, Chocolate, a 1924 short story by Hindi writer Pandey Bechan Sharma. This Chocolate, which examined homoerotic desires, while Lihaf, a 1942 short story by Urdu writer Ismat Chughtai, subtly explored lesbianism. And the law was finally overturned in September 2018 after a lot of hard work. So there is again another writer, Manju Kapoor, who has written about a married woman based on these lines. Okay, now moving on to the next uh, theme, that is crime fiction. These are the other novels where we can even find them as in crime fiction and detective novels of India. So the early 19th century to probably 1960 period was dominated by male-oriented crime fiction. So this genre was enriched with women investigators by the late 20th century. Now, crime fiction, like other popular literature, changes with time and reflects cultural and social shifts in the society. So thus, crime fiction is a mirror of contemporary society and its values. Then we have campus novel in India. The latest, I think you all can connect to the Chetan Bhagat's 5 Point Someone. So there, you know, the campus novel, a campus novel also known as an academic novel. It's a novel whose main action is set in and around the campus of a university. The genre in its current form dates back to the early 1950s. The novels are usually told from the viewpoint of a faculty member, example, Lucky Jim, or the viewpoint of a student, example, Tom Wolfe's I Am Charlotte Simons. Although there are early examples of campus settings in Indian novels, but full-fledged campus setting is found in Chetan Bhagat's 5 Point Someone. Then we also have The Groves of Academia by Mary McCarthy. Then we also have The Professor's House, written by Willia Cather, and so on. Right. So moving on to the next slide, which talks about the graphic novel in India. So the emergence of graphic novel, I'm sure we are all familiar with these kind of, I think it all started with small, tiny books called the comics, where a lot of illustrations were there along with the commentary or the kind of text, where it was quite convenient and very, I mean, could legible, and was very interesting for the children especially. Now the emergence of graphic novel, which is kind of parallel narrative with complementary text and illustration, is also a promising feature of contemporary fiction in India. So to name a few, maybe Ashok Banker's Prince of Ayodhya, which was published in 2003, Amrita Patil's Kari in 2008, then the Ramayana, the Mahabharata. Now we have digital graphic novels too. Then moving on to the concerns for the subaltern in contemporary Indian fiction. So the subaltern is a term given by the Antonia Gramsci to refer to those groups in society who are under the hegemony of the ruling elite class. Subaltern class include peasants, tribes, women, and other groups denied access to get hegemonic power. Historically speaking, subaltern studies defined itself as an attempt to allow people to speak under, in fact, they were, was given that kind of a freedom for the people to speak out, to voice out. Under subaltern studies, new kind of writings has been started. The subalterns have given an opportunity to speak and share their pains, anger, sufferings, and experiences, which was defined and denied by the elitist historians and scholars. So the subaltern scholars tried to make an alternative history, writing in which history would be written from below rather than from above. In the domain of literature, we can trace the root of subalternity in the narration of Premchand writings. Subaltern subjects such as peasants, women, and Dalit makes their strong presence. But subaltern as an autonomous domain of history and cultural studies emerged against elitist historiography of the Western world. So in post-colonial India, the subaltern studies reflected in the various forms of writings of history and literature. So it becomes a dominant framework in literature when the marginalized sections of the society has no voice of its own. Now, we have seen Premchand has written extensively on the issue of peasants, caste, and gender. And then again, in his book Nirmala, he touches the ignored corner of women's lives, and he portrayed the character of Nirmala as a symbol of rooted patriarchy in the society. Then Mahashweta Devi, a prolific writer, left behind an impressive collection of more than 100 novels and many short stories, namely Breast Givers, Dowli, Draupadi, and Rudali, encompassing themes of dispossession, rebellion, insurgencies, and student movements in Calcutta. She has written mainly in the Bengali language, but incorporating tribal dialects. She goes against all sorts of hegemonic socio-political ideologies to voice subalterns. Right. So moving on to the next, we have the novelists of Indian diaspora. Here, the Indian writers of the modern diaspora can be divided into two different classes. One category includes those who have spent part of their lives in India and brought their heritage assets abroad. Now, the other group are those who grew up outside of India. They just dream of their own country from outside, like a strange place where they started. The writers in the first group had actually displacements, while those in the second group found themselves uprooted. So both groups of writers have created a great deal of English literature. When these writers portrayed immigrant characters in their novels, they examined the themes of displacement, alienation, assimilation, and cultural adaptation. The diaspora or immigrant writing occupies an important place between the country and the culture. Now, diaspora writing has many benefits and a powerful network connects the entire world. The most important characteristics of diaspora writing include nostalgia, the search for identity, family, and marital relationships, as well as eradicating and embedding the multicultural environment. So, English Indian writers such as Anita Desai, Bharati Mukherjee, Shauna Singh Baldwin, Amitav Ghosh, Anjana Appachana, Sunetra Gupta, Anita Nair, Jhumpa Lahiri, Chitra Banerjee, Divakaruni have become prominent writers in the Indian diaspora writing tradition. Now, as an immigrant, Bharati Mukherjee faced the same problem to adapt the traditions, culture, and society of a foreign country, represented by the lifestyles of the two protagonists, Jasmine and Dimple. Now, the investigator pointed out the problems of the protagonists, Dimple and Jasmine, began to cross their national borders and settle on new foreign land. It also reveals your resentment, assimilation, sense of belongingness, and disappointment. Then Again, Anita Nair is an acclaimed and best-selling author, and she has written 9 novels, 2 plays, and a collection of short stories. She has even written a screenplay for the movie adaptation of her novel, Lessons in Forgetting. Her rebellious women characters break the societal chains and affirm their individuality. So, women writers pave a new path for women in their writings. Right. So now let us move on to the next unit, which talks about The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. Right. So first and foremost, the God of Small Things is narrated from the third person omniscient point of view. So it is told by someone who sees the action and knows the character's secrets without being part of the story. This narrative choice allows readers to experience the events from different characters' perspectives. However, a large percentage of the story is told as witnessed by one main character, Rahul. Now, let us quickly take a look into the life history of Arundhati Roy. So, her full name is Susanna Arundhati Roy. She's an Indian author, best known for her novel, The God of Small Things, which won the Booker Prize for Fiction in 1997 and became the best selling book by a non expatriate Indian author. She is also a political activist involved in human rights and environmental causes. Well, she was born on November 24th, 1961 in Shillong, and she is married to Pradeep Krishan. And then she's also won quite a good number of awards, Booker Prize, Sydney Peace Prize, and so on. And she is one of the few Indian English writers actively interested in contemporary socio-political issues, as in amply evidenced in a number of articles, interviews, and books she's written on various topics in recent years. The impact of a novel, The God of Small Things, is all the more significant considering that the author has so far produced only one novel, which won her the Booker McConnell in 1997. This was the first Booker awarded to a non-expatriate Indian woman writer. The God of Small Things does not merely transcribe reality, but makes it come alive. Roy renders her varied experience of Indian reality through subjective mental lenses by aptly employing experimental narrative techniques. She views the socio-political situations of South India with ironic detachment, but highlights almost each and every incident happening around her with a fidelity to reality, which an ordinary eye is prone to miss. Now, in this God of Small Things, Arundhati Roy portrays the plights of women in 3 dimensions. That is the first one, where Ammu's suffocating premarital stay in Aymanan, her return with 2 children to an unwelcoming family, and finally her brief affair with Veluta, which cuts her life short. Then Mamachi's extremely disturbed conjugal tie with Papachi, which results from Chaco's attempt to stop Papachi's regular beating of Mamachi. Baby of Kochama's unrequited love for Father Mulliganan and her eventual spinsterhood, women's place. This is how she tries to show in these 3 places. Now, when you look at the summary of this, it talks like this, that The God of Small Things is a heartrending story about 7-year-old Esther and Rahul. They are both twins. They both, along with their mother, live in their maternal grandparents' house in Kerala following her mother's divorce. Then Ammu works in the family's pickle factory, in spite of which she and her kids are denied any rights, let alone love, by her Oxford returned brother, Chako, who considers them nothing less than milestones around his neck. Millstones, that's kind of a burden. So the story goes further when Chaco's ex-wife, Margaret, brings their daughter Sophie to Imanon on a visit from London. The ill-fated visit ends in the demise of Sophie, for which Esther and Rahel have to pay a heavy price, and the kids are the biggest victims as they are snatched off their childhood, their happiness sought in small things. The story reveals history's cruel way of taking revenge at people who break the love laws. So basically, the meaning of the title, it goes like this. Small things, kind of beginning of the novel, Esther's dog, Muralidharan, and then the big God in control versus small God. So from the children's perspective, away from the adult, boundaries, small transgressions in language. Now, the structure of the book is a collection of small things, like, kind of episodic, fragmentary, like everybody's life. Then Velita is actually the god of small things for Ammu. So basically, if I look at it, it becomes evident that women's place in a male chauvinistic society is never equal to that of men. Women's suffering start with their family and continue throughout. Mamachis, Amul, Rahel, and baby Kochama suffer differently due to the cruel treatment of the society they live in. Social structures are also formed as to sanctify women's victimization. And Arundhati Roy's depiction of the miserable lives of women in the novel critiques in unmistakable terms the perpetuation of these exploitative forces. Okay, coming to the themes. So you look at it as the family and social obligations, Indian politics, society and class, love and sexuality, change versus preservation. That's how he keeps mentioning about the pickle factory. Then small things. So when I talk about family and social obligation, the code of small things basically deals with the complicated relationships between members of the family in Imanam, India. Each family member has different factors weighing on their relationships, like social obligation, familiar duty, and personal dislike. And baby Kochama, one of the book's most negative characters, allows her personal grudges and preoccupation with society's approval to lead her to betray her own family. So when I talk about Indian politics, society, and class as one of the theme, the members of the family deal with a variety of social and political influences that cause much internal and external struggle in the novel. So in the larger society of Kerala, India, in I think 1969 portion of the novel, where Marxist ideas have taken root and begin to upset the class system of landlords and laborers. So this directly affects Paradise Pickles and the characters of Veluta, Choco, and Comrade Pillai. Now, coming to the love and sexuality, love comes in many forms in the God of Small Things, but it is most important when it crosses divides of society and duty. The relationship between Esther and Rahul is the strongest in the book, as the two are so close as to almost consider themselves as one person. Yet when the young Rahul lists the people she loves, she doesn't include Esther, but instead those she is supposed to love according to her list. So get the, then again, we have change versus preservation, where many characters try to preserve old memories and traditions in the novel. But Roy also portrays the inevitable march of change through small shifts in the status quo. So Paradise Pickles and Preserves is the most obvious symbol of the preservation, as Mamachi and the people of Aimnan cling to the old caste system and the gender double standard. Then we have small things as one of the theme in both the novel's title and in her writing style. Roy emphasizes the small moments like objects and changes that symbolize that lead to the big things in life like death, love, and political upheaval. Right. So moving on to the next writer, that is Amitav Ghosh, about the shadow lines. Born in Calcutta in 1956, he was a diplomat, a father in corporate travel in his formative years. Primarily lived in India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Iran. Schooling from the Doon School, completed graduate studies from the University of Delhi. So now Ghosh, Amitav Ghosh chooses his title to suggest that borders which separate people are mere shadows and nothing more than artificial lines created by politicians. So Amitav Ghosh, the shadow lines, deal with political freedom in the modern world, nationalism, and the shadow lines we people draw between us and nations. In its simplest form, the story is about a young boy in India who is the narrator. The story begins in India and later transfers to London. The story moves through the young boy's memories and especially concentrates on the memory of his cousin, Ila, who he is attracted to. And however, because of the social constrictions of his society, the narrator stays with a platonic relationship. Another interaction Ghosh focuses on is that of the narrator's relationship with another male cousin, Tridib. Right. Moving on to the next. The novel deals with the concerns of our period, the search for identity, the need for independence, the difficult relationship with colonial culture. It magnificently interweaves facts, fiction, and reminiscence, friction and reminiscence. And it's a continuous narrative which replicates the pattern of violence not only for 1964 but also for the 21st century. Now, the theme here is the concept of nationalism that is gaining ground in today's world. The author he had held an extreme form of nationalism responsible for many a problem these days. Love of the country, passion inspired nationalism, and intoxication of patriotism cannot but lead to jingoism. Thus, nationalism, which had and which has great uses, can become the greatest obstacle to world unity and world peace. So, this tribal instinct has been magnified beyond all measures, resulting in political and economic megalomania. And the novel, in its enthusiasm to prove the point, has gone a little too far to proclaim that nationalism is a defunct force. Now, the techniques which were used in this novel is deals with the epic themes of travel. His novels relates history, political struggle, communal violence, love, loss of values, etc. Now, he deliberately crosses the boundary between anthropology and artistic work. His narratives are categorically transnational in sweep. His stories move restlessly across countries, continents, and even oceans. His narratives always reflect the wisdom of an Oxford scholar. His views and opinions are meticulously researched and learned. In every book, an epic scale of scholarship is directly discernible. Now, the characters which we come across, Tridib, the protagonist, is a middle-class boy who grows up in a middle-class family. He's the narrator's uncle. And Thamma, the narrator grandmother, she was the headmistress of a girls' school in Calcutta. Ila, she is the narrator's cousin who lives in Stockwell, London. May, she's the Price family's daughter. She's in love with Tridib. Nick, he's the Price family's son. He marries Ila during the course of the novel. Maya Devi, she's the narrator's grandmother's younger sister and Tridib's mother. So if you look at it, this is in fact a post-colonial kind of a script literature work, which holds a narrative technique. The fictionalized narrative is interwoven with history and validated by actual experience in the lives of the major characters. And it explores the deceptive nature of national borders that are constructed to project an image of difference across political divides. The partition is also projected as an act of meaningless violence. At the end, Tudib aspires to become a global citizen. He is a man without a country. He meets his tragic end at the hands of a rioting mob in Dhaka. His vision seems to succumb to the brutal forces of reality. And Ghosh has used these memories to construct the concept of freedom and its undertones in the modern world. So the narrator comes to the conclusion that lines separating the two nations are only shadow lines. The shadow lines can be read as destabilizing the fixed binary logic imposed on nation of otherness, identity, history, and memory in the construction of nationalist boundaries. So that is how we find the geopolitical division in this. So the characters' personal lives are often affected by geographical and political divisions. And in this way, the novel seeks to examine how these changes can be integral factors in shaping one's personal trajectory. So the character of Tama represents a major example in the novel, as her personal life and perspective are shaped by political phenomena. For example, in Tama's backstory, her senses of home and identity have been disrupted by political changes. She was born in Dhaka, but she moved to India after marriage. The narrator notes, Tama had no time to go back to Dhaka in the next few years. And then in 1947 came partition, and Dhaka became the capital of East Pakistan. There was no question of going back after that. So thus she became separated and estranged from members of her family due to the redrawing of borders. Right. So with this, we end the final session of this module or the block 5, and also the final session of our class. So I hope you all have read the book, and if you haven't, please make sure you have to read it and also follow my video. And still, if you still have some doubts, maybe you can discuss it. I can kind of clarify your doubts, but you have to read the book at the same time, watch this, then you will have a clear picture about what is given in the book. Right. So with this, we end the session. Thank you all. A good day.